Hey Faith, and hi everyone. Thanks for tuning in. It's great to be speaking with you all, and happy Earth Day. My name is Rob Crystal Ornelas. I'm a postdoc at Berkeley Lab, which means I'm relatively early in my career. I've now spent 2 years at Berkeley Lab, and excited to share with you all what I do for within the Earth and environmental science area here at the lab. Next up. So just a quick introduction to my journey to getting here to Berkeley Lab. So I did my undergraduate studies at Boston University. I'm originally from the tiny state of Rhode Island, so uh, went just a little bit further north to Boston, where I studied biology. After that, I worked for a couple of organizations that you can see toward the bottom of the screen there. I'm really passionate about education as well. So I spent time back in my hometown of Providence working for those two nonprofits in education. I then did my PhD at Rutgers University studying ecology and evolution. I got really into statistics and computer programming there. And so while I study ecology, as you'll see, a lot of my work has to do with the interface of like studying the environment, understanding ecosystem processes, but also doing a little computer programming and statistics as well. Um, I then taught a little bit at University of San Francisco here in the Bay Area where I'm living, and worked at Santa Rosa Junior College. And then now I'm a postdoc at Berkeley Lab where I work for ESS Dive, and you can see our logo there on the screen. It's a data repository, which means we get to store and preserve environmental data from Department of Energy scientists who are studying different aspects of the environment all over the US. So we take people's data and we make sure it's stored forever on our supercomputers up at the lab. Next slide. Yeah, and this kind of diagram here shows a little depiction. If we start in the green square up in the left, we have, say, environmental sensors all over the country. We're recording things like air quality. We have sensors in different streams all over that are studying water quality. And then we help researchers, kind of the pencil icon down there is that we help researchers describe their data that they collect from the field. We want to make sure they're not just kind of writing it down in notebooks, but that they're also storing it on their computers. And then we make sure that they move their data from their computers to us at ESS Dive. And again, as I said, ESS Dive is this data repository, which is just like you can think of it as a big library for environmental data, a big virtual library, and we store that data on the supercomputers up at Berkeley Lab. And then the benefit of doing all of that is that anyone can log into our website, log into our data repository. Don't even need an account really to do that. You can just visit our data repository and reuse any of the data that's been collected and submitted to us from Department of Energy researchers. So that's a great benefit for people that want to incorporate other people's data into maybe their models to try to understand aspects of the environment. Our data gets used in classrooms, and our data gets used by graduate students as they're completing their studies. So I'm really what excites me about the work here is that one, I get to see people's data from all over the US. It feels like I'm kind of virtually traveling to all these cool field sites. And then this idea of data being recycled over and over and reused is, I think, a really exciting part of the work that we're doing at ESS Dive. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Thanks to Faith and the other organizers for letting me speak to you today about a little bit about my research. And shout out to Rob, who also shares a love with me of science embroidery. So you could check out some of Rob's very cool embroidery of the natural world at his website. Didn't mention that, Rob, but I will do it for you. So my name is Colleen Iverson. I am a distinguished staff scientist in the Climate Change Science Institute and Environmental Sciences Division here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I'm also an ecosystem ecologist, which means I'm interested in studying the cycling of carbon, water, nutrients, and energy amongst the living and non-living parts of our world. If you want to find out more about my work, you can check out my website there or follow me on Twitter. And the overarching question of my research is to try to better understand the hidden half of ecosystem responses to climate change. So next slide, please. So I am originally from Michigan. I got my Bachelor of Science at Hope College, and I've been moving further south ever since. So a master's in wetland ecology at Notre Dame, my PhD at the University of Tennessee in ecology and evolutionary biology. And then I've been here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory since 2008. As I sort of moved southward, I became increasingly more interested in what's happening in that hidden world beneath our feet. And so you can see some of the photos there, me reaching my hand into the tundra in Alaska and touching permafrost or permanently frozen soil. And also some pictures there that I have robot cameras taking for me in a bog in northern Minnesota, where I track when roots are born, how much they grow, and when they die. And really all of that interest is because soils store twice as much carbon as what's in the atmosphere. And so we really want to know what's happening at that interface between plants, tiny tundra plants, all the way up to towering trees in the tropics. Next slide, please. And so our division does work all over North America and, in fact, the Western Hemisphere. And so sometimes to better understand the consequences of future climate change for the natural world and for better understanding of what decisions we make as a society, we have to build those possible futures. So there in the lower right, you can see what we call a FACE experiment, free air CO2 enrichment, where we're adding extra carbon dioxide to an intact deciduous forest in eastern Tennessee. That experiment ran for 12 years. And for someone like me interested in the sort of plant soil interface, instead of looking at a seedling in a pot or a sapling in a chamber and their response to elevated CO2, we looked at a whole forest. And that's one of the great things about being in a national laboratory, is being able to leverage the technology here and the interdisciplinary collaborations to measure everything from microbes all the way up to the trees above. Now, currently, we also have an experiment in northern Minnesota in a peat bog, which is a kind of wetland that only covers 3% of the global land surface, but stores more than a third of terrestrial carbon in deep deposits of peat that have been accumulating for 11,000 years in this case. And for this experiment, we are warming it up and adding extra carbon dioxide to understand how the bog species, microbes, moss, trees will respond. And then we also work in Alaska. The Next Generation Ecosystems experiment in a couple of places there where the Arctic is rapidly changing. It's warming 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the world. So instead of building a possible future there, we're actually tracking the rapid pace of climate change there and how it impacts plants and soils in that region and what the feedbacks might be to the atmosphere. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Colleen. That was and Rob. Those were really great introductions. I'm Adam Nylander. I'm an associate scientist in the SunCat Center at SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory. SLAC is just about 30 minutes south of San Francisco. So I also am not too far away from Rob at LBL. And as an associate scientist, I just started my career at SLAC. If you saw on Colleen's list there, I think that she was an associate scientist in 2010. So hopefully I can follow her path up the ladder someday. Next slide. So my career path, I grew up in Southwest Virginia in a town called Roanoke, graduated from Cave Spring High School before heading to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville to do my bachelor's and master's in chemistry. From there, I moved across the country to Caltech and Pasadena. Growing up, absolutely was not planning on making the switch from East Coast to West Coast, but I've now been in California for 10 years and have really enjoyed it. After grad school, I moved to Stanford, where I switched to chemical engineering from chemistry to really get in, dig my teeth into sustainable energy technologies, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And just last year, I began my career at Slack as an associate scientist. Next slide. And so what we do in SunCat and at Slack National Lab is to try to take sunlight and electricity, along with molecules that you are all very familiar with, I bet, things like water, oxygen, nitrogen in the air, and try to combine them to make sustainable fuels and chemicals. So why would we do this, right? One thing that you probably know is that the sun is an really important renewable source of energy for all of us, but it doesn't shine at night. And so if we want to use that energy at night, we need to store it. And you can do that in a number of different ways. Of course, batteries are a great way. Another good way is to make fuels, right? And hydrogen, ammonia, liquid carbon fuels are all things that are within our grasp. And so that is what we work on every day, is to try to bring those closer to something that we can use in our everyday lives. And so to do that, what we specifically do is we work on making materials that we refer to as catalysts. I'm sure some of you are familiar, but if you're not, what catalysts do is they direct that renewable energy that we want to use into the chemicals that we want to make. And you have to be very careful, right? Because if you don't direct it just the right way, right, you might get something different. It might be less efficient, right? It might be less safe. And so what we're doing is trying to turn all of those knobs just right to get us the renewable fuels that we want to, make this global transition to sustainable energy safely and affordably. So yeah, I'm looking forward to answering some questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for a wonderful overview of who you are and how you got to be at the National Lab. So I think as the theme for this year's Earth Day is investing in our Earth, how do you think your work directly impacts the planet?
I can take a quick stab first, since I am maybe least, and I'm the one who's least likely to actually be touching the Earth itself, it sounds like. So for me, the way I answer that, when I'm waking up in the morning thinking about why I want to go to work today, is that every molecule of CO2 that we can keep out of the atmosphere, we think it is an important one to keep out of the atmosphere. And so that is the heart of our goal, right? Is to take that sun energy and convert it to fuels that aren't going to ultimately release CO2 into the atmosphere. And I think that's a pretty important goal. And so yeah.
I think for me, the way that I think about it, one of the reasons I love to be at a national laboratory is because there's so many people focused on the problem, the mission, right, of understanding what the future might hold for society. And so even though I measure a small part of the world in just a few places, I can put that information together with information from other people like pieces of a puzzle. And in fact, where we like to put those puzzle pieces together is in these supercomputers, these advanced models that actually can use the entire globe as an experiment. So depending on decisions we make today, those models can help us predict out 50 or 100 years to understand the consequences of those decisions. So carbon dioxide that atom doesn't let into the atmosphere, or carbon that's stored in the soil, and think about how that might impact a future climate.
Yeah, and for me, as kind of in this role of, if you want to call it like a data librarian who helps people store their data, I think the impacts are that when we want to try to identify like patterns and changes to our environment and our planet over a long period of time, it's really easy if you write your experiments and your results down in a notebook to kind of lose that material. But there's a lot of power in being able to store and revisit data over longer periods of time, like multiple decades, to identify patterns. And I think those are some of the impacts that kind of working for this data repository that I work for, that we can have on the planet, making sure that data is around for whoever wants to use it at any point, for as long as we're able to store it.
So, as we may have educators and students on the line today, was there a certain class teacher or experience that pushed you toward your specific field of study? Adam?
Yeah, that's a great question. There definitely were. And I think for me, the first one that comes to mind, his name was Mike Riley. I actually just looked him up on Google a couple days ago, so I was curious how it was going for him. And since I finished high school a very long time ago, he was my AP chemistry teacher, and I think that the thing that he instilled in me, or the thing that really made me love that class, was that it wasn't just memorizing facts about chemistry. And there are a lot of facts about chemistry that you can memorize, right? It's about problem solving, doing puzzles, and like that's the sort of thing that I think that anybody, could really enjoy. Like I think everybody loves solving a good puzzle. And so I think him showing me that was very important.
Colleen?
Yeah, for me, it was Mr. Brayman and Mrs. Genter. Isn't it funny how you remember your favorite teachers all these years later? And for me, it was Science Olympiad. So shout out, fellow Science Olympiaders. Just the being exposed to there's so many different ways to science. And I think like Adam says, just all of our science are so excited about learning about the natural world. And so just all the things out there to learn and explore, and that excitement I think that the best teachers bring, I think, yeah, sets you on that path for the future.
And Rob?
Yeah, for me, I guess my advisor in graduate school comes to mind. Her name's Julie Lockwood, and I think the kind of atmosphere that she created in the lab, or in this lab that we worked in, made it really, it felt like really easy to ask questions. Like, I think I felt a lot of nervousness. I was like the first in my family to go to college and all that. And so then I'm in this graduate program and feeling really nervous about my skills that I'm bringing in and like uncertainty that I could succeed. But to sort of be in, a part of a research team where it's like no matter who you are, if you don't know the answer, just ask the question and you're not getting any judgment about it, made it I think like made our science better because we were all on the same page and all felt supported. So I think like I try to cultivate that now when I work in teams.
So that leads to the next question that you sort of rolled into, Rob, which is, have you found ways in your work to inspire future generations of scientists? Or to kind of extend the question, do you get the opportunity to work with students or undergrads in any way, or graduate students? Rob, do you want to
Yeah,
share if you do?
yeah, sure. So even as a postdoc at the National, so like pretty early on, I've been able to work with some really great undergraduates and graduate students. I was able to, with my supervisor's help, hire an intern from the community colleges in our area. The Department of Energy has this CCI program, the Community College Internship Program. And so I was able to work with a student who's still employed by us, not through that program, just as a research assistant, which was really cool experience. So that was a summer program and got to mentor him and now work with him as a coworker. And then also I helped co-mentor a Cal State University East Bay master's student too. So he's doing like some really serious programming and I'm sort of like trying to help him as best I can in that. So yeah, a couple nice opportunities at the lab.
I'm just going to add to the question as we pass it off to Colleen. Does anybody work with K-12 students? Any high school programs?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I just spoke to Miss Miller's sixth grade class yesterday about ecosystem ecology. And so there's a program called Skype a Scientist that connects scientists with children all over the world that I like to take advantage of. And now Oronel also has a program which puts us virtually into classrooms. And that is my favorite. But let me tell you, the kids have the hardest questions. And what I always tell the kids that I talk to K through 12 is that kids are the best scientists. They're already observing the natural world and asking questions and doing experiments like turning over logs to see what's below them. And so, just to keep that excitement. And then I would echo Rob and say, some of the best scientists that we've had come through our laboratory have been through the DOE SULI or CCI programs. We love to have them with us and mentor them, and they make big contributions to our science. So please look that up if you're in college. Come work with us.
And how about you, Adam?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to what Colleen and Rob said. So first, I guess actually I'll very quickly advertise for the DOE's Science Bowl, which is for middle school and high school students and is behind me on my virtual background here. It's a great opportunity for the younger students to get involved with science. But, really just to echo what they already said, the people are the most important part of science. Like without them, it's not an enterprise at all, right? Like if you write papers alone in your office, that's not what it's about. And so I spend about half of my time working with graduate students and undergraduates, and those interactions are critical, both, and honestly, as much for me as it is for them, because that question asking, like Rob was saying, is like you can't get science done without it. And so whatever level you're at, just know that like those questions are really important for all of us. And yeah, I wouldn't want to do science if we weren't involving people all up and down the line.
That's an awesome sentiment. Colleen, I'm really curious myself about how you managed a 12-year project, or to be part of a 12-year project, and I bet that takes an awful lot of patience. Do you want to expand on that for us a little?
Sure. Yeah, that project actually was where I did my dissertation research. So I found out what national laboratories were and got to be mentored by national lab folks. So that was amazing. One of the reasons that we are lucky to be funded by the Department of Energy here at the National Labs is because they're willing to make long-term investments. So trees are big and they live a long time. And if we're going to do experiments to think about the forests of the future, we need those experiments to run for a decade in some cases. And the Department of Energy is willing to invest in that. And then the other thing I would echo is from Adam, the Arctic project that I'm a part of is 4 national laboratories and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. It spans 150 scientists across the country, and we all work together to sort of understand this rapid pace of change in the Arctic. And so collaboration and cross-disciplinary science is sort of a hallmark of getting to work at a national laboratory, and I really love it.
Well, I think that really speaks to Faith's question about how does working at a national lab help researchers tackle big questions, especially addressing climate and environmental concerns. Does anyone want to add to that sentiment, answer that question?
I'll answer it from a very, perhaps a too technical perspective, but I think it'll still be worth noting, right? So, SLAC is called a National Accelerator Lab. And what that means, right, is that we have instruments that you can't find anywhere else, talking about, right, X-ray lasers that are 2 miles long, right? These are things that you can't, literally nowhere else in the world do they exist. And so if you want to answer those really big questions, right, the national labs are a place where the best tools on the planet are waiting for you to help you do that. And just as, it's not only at SLAC, actually, at LBL, where Rob is, there's also a huge synchrotron, right, sending electrons in a big circle. And I actually just got back from Oak Ridge, where we were slamming protons into mercury to make neutrons. And, right, like the teams that are in all those places who know all of that stuff, right, like the national lab system is unique, right, in its ability to provide you with, right, the very cutting edge of what's possible.
One thing that working at a national lab has shown me, and like the impact that we can have on answering these big questions, is that the teams are just like so much bigger than I'm used to working on, coming from like graduate school, where a lot of times it was like me working for like a week on a problem and then going back to one person and saying, what do you think? And then going back for another week on my own. Like I'm involved in just a couple projects at the moment, but one has 20 team members and one has like 100 team members. And that's not unusual, right? Like at the national lab. So it's just so cool to be working with like so many experts who have such like wide range of knowledge. Like if there's a software engineering question that I just don't have the expertise to understand or solve on my own, like I never have to solve it on my own. I can go to the software people and ask them a question. So it's this like collaborating with awesomely skilled people, and having more than one person to kind of bounce your ideas off is really really fun way to do science.
So, how do you think we can tell more students about the awesome science that happens at the National Lab complex? Any thoughts? We're kind of a hidden national gem.
I have thoughts about that. I just think it's so important. I know that, a lot of folks that you see on the street wear sort of NASA t-shirts and they think NASA's so cool, right? But we do super cool science too. And so just, to get the word out, I would love to see folks wearing National Lab shirts, instead of looking up into space, a telescope to look back at the Earth because it's so cool and exciting. And so, TikTok or Twitter or, just I think new ways of communicating because the next generation's communicating in different ways than even we may.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I see
think,
this. Oh,
go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, I see this question as a reminder that of how important it is for us on the line and for all of our colleagues to get the word out. Because once again, I was just at Oak Ridge a couple of weeks ago, and it's awesome. Oak Ridge is awesome. Like, I mean, I didn't realize how awesome it was, right? And I think that the more people who know that through events like Earth Day today and T-shirts, however we can do it, we should be doing it because I can't imagine there's too many people out there who would see it and not be excited by it.
Rob, anything to add?
Yeah, and I mean, I just kind of love the programming that the K through 12 offices kind of at our national labs put on as well. It's so exciting to kind of like, I mean, that experience I was talking about earlier, we were able to bring in a community college student and introduce him to the work, and then bring him on the team. Like, I totally think that's kind of a nice way of introducing. So there's more opportunities and more promotion of that. I think is such a nice way of introducing people to what we do and actually giving them hands-on experience, to show them what our work looks like.
So it was just shared with me that we are doing some TikTok content in partnership with CBS's Mission Unstoppable, which has showcased a lot of researchers throughout the different laboratories. So keep an eye out for that and for some Space Day content in May. So I think that there is a lot to share. We just have to keep getting the word out and through our many multi-team efforts. So I have another question. Does anybody want to share what a day looks like in your lab for you?
I can share. I love this question because one of my favorite things about being a scientist is that every day is different. So some days I might be in my office writing a paper. Other days I might be in the lab with handfuls of soil looking through roots. Other days I might be in the field in Minnesota or in Alaska digging around in soil that's permanently frozen or permanently flooded and getting to meet colleagues in Australia or Germany or, it's really, as Adam mentioned, it's all about the people. And it's all about making it what you want to make it, and it's about sharing ideas. And so that didn't answer your question, but every day is exciting, I think I would say.
Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that every day is different. In general, I probably spend about half of my time thinking about what the next thing we should do is, and half of my time working with students either in the lab or at our desks, looking at data, trying to figure out what the next important question for us to ask is, right? And it's always about the questions, right? It's like, what is the next question and what are we going to do to answer it? And of course, maybe the most fun days, although they're all pretty fun, it's always fun when we have built up these questions, we're getting to the very end when it's time to do an experiment where, inside the chamber of the experiment, the pressure is as low as outer space and the temperature is like the coldest, is the coldest place on the planet in that moment. And so you really build up to those like unique moments as well. And that's, again, something that I think the national labs allow you to do, those sorts of things. And just to add, day to day as well, being a part of a team, there's lots of us. And one thing that I like to do is to play sports in the evenings. And so we've got our laboratory softball teams and we meet up for tennis. And so it's not just science, fun things with science all day. Because the team is so varied, there's usually somebody who enjoys your hobbies around too.
And yeah, my days are a lot of, I do mostly computer work, but it's a combo of kind of meeting with other team members and trying to solve problems together, or talking about a presentation we're giving at another national lab. We do a lot of these like virtual visits to different national labs to talk about our work. And so it's maybe planning how that presentation is going to go, or which group we can meet with next. So in that sense, it's pretty fun to bounce around different labs as well. And then I do a lot of programming with the language Python. If anyone out there is like learning some coding or working on coding, I do a lot of coding and writing papers as well. And the writing's like, again, really collaborative, like lots of different people to bounce ideas off of. And that's what kind of keeps it fun and interesting. Yeah, totally agree with everyone else. And like no day is the same. Yeah, and what I work on definitely shifts day to day.
So I think that that's a very common thread for researchers throughout the National Lab Complex, that the type of work that we do is diverse and varied, and so it remains challenging and exciting and new all the time. But I want to riff off of what Adam said. So what do you guys like to do for fun once you close the computer and the workday's done?
Sure. I have two kids, two boys, an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I spend a lot of time with them. Lately, most of the discussions are about Minecraft. um, but I also, as I mentioned earlier, I like to embroider. I took up embroidery during the pandemic. And so I embroider roots and muskox and bugs, and sort of, it's very relaxing and also fun to think about the world.
Are they three-dimensional embroidery art
No,
pieces?
painting and thread, both.
Yeah, and Colleen's embroideries are great, and thanks for the shout out earlier. We both found that common interest like a little while ago, that we both shared that interest. I just recently got a beehive for my backyard, so my weekends are like hanging out with the bees, seeing what they're up to, trying not to get stung. That's part of the weekend. And then I also like watching basketball, and since I'm Bay Area, I'm a big Warriors fan, so that's fun. That's like fun stuff to do in the evenings too.
Yeah, and I think I already sort of hinted at it, but one of the nice things about Slack is that they have because when researchers come, they usually stay on campus. They have a big gym and sports facility for us. So meeting up with people from around the lab to play sports, to play basketball, to go watch basketball, to watch the Warriors after at the end of the day are all big highlights for me.
That's fantastic. It's very important to have a work-life balance so we can all come back to our jobs each day fresh and ready to roll. So what's the most unique place that your research has taken you? I'm wondering if Colleen may take the prize on this.
I feel very lucky to have gotten to work in the Arctic tundra in a couple of different places. We work out of Utqiagvik, used to be Barrow, Alaska, recently renamed. And Utqiagvik means a place to gather wild roots, which I appreciate. Getting to touch permafrost with my hands. And then we work further south out of Nome, Alaska, where standing on the hill slopes there and looking out, it looks like you're standing on just a totally different planet that no one's ever been to. And it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I can't compete with that. But I will say that being a laboratory scientist doesn't mean that you spend all the time just in your laboratory. I've gotten to go all over the place for conferences and for collaborations. Germany, Denmark, London, Oak Ridge, up the road to Berkeley. This month I'm going to Vancouver and New York City, and that is all. The National Lab, of course, is funding all of that. So, it's you get to do exciting work and someone else is paying for you to see the world at the same time. Can't complain about it.
Well, that's fantastic. Does anybody have any thoughts as a last question about what the virtual experiences have opened us to or opened you to in your research experience over the course of the pandemic? Maybe something positive or negative that the experience has brought you to.
Yeah, I guess for me, I started at Berkeley Lab virtually and actually just visited the lab for the first time 2 weeks ago. So it was like really exciting to be in person. But I will say virtually, I do feel like I've been able to do these like virtual site visits and people kind of welcoming me into their project meetings to talk about what we do at ESS Dive. So like, I feel like I've been on meetings with everyone and have been able to bounce around the national labs like more than I would have otherwise having just started out. So excited to have more of those in-person interactions for sure, but it's been nice getting to know people already over a couple of years.
And I would say the newly virtual world has made us more creative on how to continue building those connections across teams. For example, our 5 institutions within the Arctic project. So a virtual hands meeting where we end the day playing Arctic categories and reminiscing about pizza in the field, I think really helps to build those connections outside of work in addition to inside.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense to me. I think, again, for me, one of the things that I did not appreciate until it was gone was just how important that sort of shoulder to shoulder work in a laboratory can be, and like the sort of the communication that happens when you're next to each other that you don't even realize is happening until it's gone. And so absolutely, it's been a lot of creativity to maintain that as much as we could virtually. But it really just reminded me how great it is to have us all together when it's possible.
Well, this was an awesome time together. Is there anything you'd like to share as a parting thought while we're all here?
Thanks for letting us speak to all of you. And I hope that you will reach out and feel free to email any of us and just look up what the National Labs do and come join us if you want to.
Agreed. Slack is all about bringing people together, bringing new people into the field. So send us an email. We'll be happy to make that happen.
Likewise. Yeah. Agreed with everything. Great chat with y'all.